There we go. Okay. The reason I wanted to have this conversation with my friends and these other wise women today is because, as we are aging, we know that the future of parrots is going to depend on, the our follow-on generations. So all we can hope for is that any lessons we may have learned, and often the hard way at our bird's expense, right, that we can pass on that information to our future leaders who we're depending on to look out for the future of parrots. And that, um, you know, the best I hope for is that they will take time to listen, ask questions. I know that's how I learned everything, was by asking all kinds of questions from all kinds of people. Even if I thought I had the answer already, I just wanted to know and absorb. And that, I think, helped me be able to do more for parrots, was because I was able to collaborate in that way. And I think the same of you all. That's what's made us so good for parrots. But they have a long way to go, right? So there's so many things we could talk about. I thought one of the first things might be we could ask ourselves what we might have done differently after all these years. What do you think?
I would have gotten budgies instead of cockatoos. Um, Having lived now with two budgies for about 5 years is, oh my goodness, they're so much easier. But boy, there's so much I would do differently. I started back in the 80s with gathering cockatoos to breed. And I actually was living in the Philippines very quickly. Living in the Philippines, we bought cockatoos there and brought them home when we were ready to come home, and we were going to breed cockatoos and sell them to the companion market, and that would help lessen the poaching and taking of birds from the wild. Little did we know that buying cockatoos in the Philippines, we were actually contributing to the poaching. I mean, we were young and naive and didn't know that sort of stuff. So I certainly wouldn't do that again. Secondly, I would think twice about breeding cockatoos for for the companion market. They are to me, I find them difficult to live with. They're very dramatic. They're very active. I saw somebody there in the chat that had 4 Gothams. Oh my goodness. Anyway, congratulations if you're still, you know,
Are you
um,
still sane? That's the question. Huh?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's another thought that goes through my head. And one more, and then I'll let Rosemary talk, is that I would not hand raise cockatoos or any parrot for that matter anymore. And I hope that we are able to discuss that a little more in depth go along. So
Yes,
so
agreed.
take over, Rosemary.
Well, Chris, you know that I'm going to endorse every single word you say, and I've written very strongly on the subject of breeding cockatoos. In fact, if you look on my website, you will see an article which stresses the fact that they are disasters as pets, generally speaking, and imploring breeders of Kakatoa species not to breed them and sell them as pets. So I do go into detail about that on my website. And you shouldn't criticize yourself for buying wild caught Philippine cockatoos, because remember, at that time, very little indeed was known about the status of parrots in the wild. In fact, our ignorance on the subject was, well, the knowledge just wasn't there because people weren't working in the field. And it wasn't until the mass export of so many parrot species in the 1980s that we began to realize that it couldn't continue, it wasn't sustainable. But even then, so few people were working in the field. Little was known about different populations and how endangered they were, or different species in general. And I have to say that in the 1980s, oh, so sweet. You know, I love
Oh,
Rodrigo.
there's one.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, I love them. My first birds as well. Yeah, so in the 1980s, I was promoting hand rearing because sorry, I have to smile at your lovely little bird.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'll put them away
yeah.
if it's scratched. Oh, I
Yeah,
can do.
yeah. In the 1980s, when I was promoting hand rearing, it was because we were receiving a lot of birds that were species, parrot species, that were virtually unknown in aviculture, and we didn't know how long we could continue to receive them. Therefore, I promoted the breeding so that we could build up captive bred populations while we had them available. What I did not foresee was that commercial breeding would take over with horrible impact on parrots in general, and a great lowering of the standard of the way that parrots were kept and bred. Therefore, I began to write against hand rearing for commercial reasons, and I did receive a lot of criticism in the American press for American agricultural press for that, and I ceased to be invited to meetings because that was not what I should have been promoting in the views of many people. But even today, I continue to write about the great importance of parent rearing. In fact, I've just done a series of 3 articles on the subject for the Parrot Society magazine. I can't emphasize enough how important parent rearing is, because by hand rearing, we are denying parrots their birthright unless it is possible to wean them with other species of their own, with other birds of their own species. That is so important.
Right.
This is a good opportunity just to thank you, Rosemary, for giving us permission to reprint your books. You're the most prolific writer.
Yes.
So much value on parrot, and so I want to make a plea to anybody listening. If you have one of her books that you're willing to share so that we can scan it and reprint it, we would be grateful to borrow it. So we don't want to lose. Talk about wisdom of the ages. We don't want to lose.
Yeah, she's in.
Okay.
There
Okay, but
she
we're
is. Yeah. Okay.
we'll let her get settled. So one of the things we're talking about, Susan. Oh, well, let me before I tell Susan what the question is, let me just say what I would do differently. I know that Phoenix has had a major influence on my life, clearly, and I think and hope an influence to the better on many other parrot lives through the forming of the foundation and all that we do.
Yes.
But if I had it to do over again, like you guys, I definitely would not get an unweaned bird, and I wouldn't get it without doing my homework. And I probably would not get a big bird who can't reasonably fly in a house. So as much as I love the macaws and my time with them, I know, like so many people who've gotten birds in their life, that that's not always in their best interest.
Yeah.
So welcome, Dr. Susan Orosz. The question we started with is, based on all the wisdom we have here that we hope to impart to future generations so they can look out for the welfare of birds to come, is what we would have done differently ourselves based on our own experience. What about you? What would you have done differently?
Well, I kind of got dropped into avian medicine at the very beginning. And all of it could have been done differently. If as with everything, there's the issue of time, money, and power. And I'm just going to speak about it from a veterinary perspective because it has been truly a difficult time to enhance and empower avian medicine and surgery. We invited a bunch of deans, the AAV did, and we had a session for deans. And we also invited them to stay for our meeting one time to let them understand the power of veterinary medicine in terms of avian, that this really needed to be part of the curriculum. And
and you're still fighting that battle. Yeah.
Yeah. And the problem is it's like we're not only are we fighting it, but we're sailing backwards.
Yeah.
So I spent 14 years of my life at the University of Tennessee fighting that backward movement and creating space, faculty, monies to do the things that needed to be done for avian medicine. And I think we're going to have to be more proactive. The owners have to be more proactive, saying that they need care, because here I am essentially just getting out of the hospital for a horrible fall, and people are pleading with me, Dr. O, please don't retire, because where are we going to take our birds? Good question.
Right.
I mean, good question. And so if I had to do it over again, I would have tried to have more staying power at the university and tried to keep going. But after the battle of 14
years, enough,
years,
Dr. Orosz. I think you do enough across the board. So
I couldn't do it anymore.
One school is not going to make a difference.
Well, no, it did, because we were the leaders at the time. When I was there, we led the vet school charge, so to speak, and then that's kind of drifted back. So I would implore everyone, though, that maybe as a group, you have to do things not necessarily as individuals, but as a group, because it has to be the power of numbers.
Demand more avian medicine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we got the moral of the story, everybody. Demand more avian medicine. Okay, let's maybe another question. What do you think is important for us to do for the future of parrots and their welfare? What's the most important things we can do? You want to start again, Chris?
Oh, thanks. Sure.
Sorry to throw this at you, but I have that gut level response. Yeah.
All right.
So many things.
You know, I will very much say that, or I'm happy to say, and I'm proud to say, I do not think parrots should be pets. There, I said it. That ship has sailed, and they are going to be our pets. So with that in mind, I want people to, well, I'll focus on myself. I really promote, again, it's like I'm beating a dead horse. I really promote parent-raised birds. And the reason I say that is very obvious to us all. You know, simply, our parrots are sentient beings. and they deserve to be treated as such.
Here.
They deserve to be treated with empathy and compassion. And when I say that, yeah, I'm not a bleeding heart. I'm just saying this is how we should treat each other, all the animals that we interact with as well. And if we treat them with compassion, that means taking action, and taking action so that the parents and the chicks are treated as they should be treated. And that's having the chicks raised by their parents. You know, when you take chicks from the nest to hand raise, the parents display anger, stress, anxiety, loud vocalizations. I saw this when I was in the Philippines, 10 years ago, and I was with the Katala Foundation, and they took me to a tree that they were going to pull a chick out and, you know, do some blood work and put a band on the chick and then put the chick back. And oh boy, you know, the red-vent cockatoo parents were up there and they were screaming and, you know, circling the tree. And it was like, oh my gosh, get that baby back there quick. And I definitely saw that with my own birds when I was poaching the chicks out of the nest to hand raise. So it's very, very distressing for them all. And I, again, with compassion and empathy, I decided not to do that anymore. It affected me negatively too. So I forgot the question, Ann. I'm sorry. I kind of went off on
Yeah, what was important that we needed to do for the future, and
Yeah,
parents, birds
it's-
is a very important one.
Is that, yes, if we're going
I
to
think
breed,
we all agree on that. Yeah.
birds, we need to change our habits.
Yes. What about you, Rosemary?
Well, I think that the question is, how can we improve the quality of life of our birds? Now, unfortunately, what we are seeing in Europe and especially in Asia is commercial breeding on a scale that was never known before. And this means keeping birds in very small cages. Basically, with two perches, they can just hop from perch to perch and they have a nest box, and that is their life. And I don't know how we can change this, because it centers around mutation breeding, and that is where the money is these days. It's now, if you look at advertisements for parrots of all species for sale, you will find more for mutations than for purebred birds. And this means that aviculture, if you can call it that, and I don't, is going in totally the wrong direction. And I just don't know how we can alter this. It's just such a craze with people that it has resulted in the number of parrot species that are being bred in captivity crashing enormously because of the concentration on mutations. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing that the number of parrot species is reducing if it means that the number of parrots kept in captivity is reducing, because, Chris, I agree with you. There are a few species that make suitable pets, and we don't have to search our conscience if we are keeping them. But unfortunately, the majority of parrot species are too intelligent and too sentient for the way we keep them. Not many people can give them sufficient space. You know, when I look back over the years, when I started, I started keeping birds in the 1950s, actually, but there weren't many different species available then. But as more became available with Australian parakeets, for example, people kept them in much larger aviaries than today. The size of aviaries is gradually reducing, and it's something that I hate to see, because these birds these days have little quality of life. There are too many breeders concentrating on the quantity of the birds that they produce and not the quality, and certainly not the quality of their lives. This is the factor that,
So what can we do differently?
really, I don't
We
know what we can do. This is the problem. There's no easy answer to it, partly because mutations have taken over to a horrendous degree.
What about you, Susan? What do you think we should do differently in the future to protect
Well,
parrots?
just to address what Rosemary's talking about, I think that in general, in the United States, I see there are some mutations, but I don't see the level of interest in mutations from a pet bird perspective. Now, the people that are breeding and exchanging birds, that's a completely different story, because, like it or not, they don't take their bird to the vet. All right. That they wait until it's either close to dead or dying, and then they show up if it's a valuable mutation, right? So I don't really see that. So what I see is I see a few small birds that are purchased as babies. I see a lot of people who have hearts of gold who are trying to take care of birds from rescues. That's what I'm seeing now. I do believe over time those big birds are reducing. I do see that, and I think that's
Is
all
that because
good.
of the big stores not selling them anymore? Do you think
They're
that's
not.
do you
No,
think that's the main reason?
yes, yes, but
Mhm.
you know, there's always that local pet store that has a diversity of species, these bigger birds that we all agree really don't make good pets. And then we come to the argument of, well, if a parakeet can come up with 300 words,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there we go, right? And so
Yep.
it's a really difficult thing, because it's just horribly difficult. I have to tell you, because I've been involved in other species of animals and trying to save endangered species while I was a faculty member at the University of Tennessee. And sometimes our desire to do the right thing often ends up in being the wrong thing. As we move forward, we realize that, well, that was wrong. Like, just like, you know, I sat down with Kevin Flammer many years ago and said, you know, Kevin, we were really wrong about assuming and telling veterinarians that they all needed to learn something about birds. But if you're trying to be a bird vet, you can't have those people who know almost nothing and do a crappy job. We need to have enough birds and enough caseload to have a veterinary practice. So that's one thing. And so with these little birds, I think there is a future in them being pets, because like I think it was Chris said, there's more room for them. They can fly around the house, they can do things, they can interact. Is it like their interaction in the wild where there's 5,000 parakeets? Let's hope not in one house. I mean, you know, but I think there's still some of that, and there's always this allure. People are just fascinated by birds. And most of those people, fortunately, take a pair of binoculars and go out and look at the birds in the wild, right?
Good point, yeah.
But we don't do a good job with those birds either. And particularly in our country, Rosemary, we're just hacking and slashing and doing a terrible job. I mean, we all complain about, oh, the rainforest is terrible, and the Indonesia is terrible. What about America? What we have this responsibility for these poor wild birds, and they don't do a very good job either. So I'm hopeful. Young people seem to be more interested in it. So there's a sense of hope.
That's kind of why we're here today in our aging years, that maybe we can pass on some of those lessons learned. And
yeah, like yesterday,
plans
I
for the
won't
future.
tell you the name of this resident, but she's an avian resident. Oh my gosh, she was so exciting. She was excited and exciting about learning avian medicine, and she had all kinds of questions for me, because she started out texting me and said, listen, this isn't working. I'm old. We need to talk. And we must have spent a half an hour on the phone. And when I get young people like that are so excited, I get juiced up too, and I get really excited, and life is really good. And those, but the problem is those people are few and far between.
Yeah.
Fewer and farther between, maybe is the way to say that.
But maybe
But
that's what we need to do, is we need to inspire more of this.
we need to inspire more, absolutely. And it's hard to get that message out.
Yeah.
But I keep handing your card to every new client. As you know, they all get to talk, right?
Good. Well, my take on what we could do differently in the future is, there's a lot of the broad thinking, but I think sometimes we have to tackle an issue like parent raised babies or whatever. And for me, it's space. I have Susan in my head about flying and this and that, but and as Rosemary said, so many birds are in such small cages. It breaks my heart every time I would cry. I have to close a cage door because it just seems wrong to close a cage door. And most of the time, no matter how wide we make them, how big we make them, we're still closing them in, So my hope for the future is that people think big, wide, open, spacious, action, and so I try to take one little issue like that and focus on it so that people will actually operationalize it. As Susan always hears me say, how do I operationalize that? How do I go out and do that thing? So I want people to know that they need to go out and think bigger, larger, action, and that's my focus.
Unless you are the person who comes in because you're the nice person who takes this bird from a rescue, and the bird is a 35-year-old bird who has arthritis.
Yeah.
Then the whole concept of
I understand.
Yeah.
I'm talking in the bigger picture here.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. But I also want to make sure that people think
every
about,
individual has a unique situation, of course.
Yeah, every
Absolutely.
individual has,
but in
absolutely.
general, cages are too small. What they sell
Absolutely.
in pet stores should be banned, period. They're not big enough for anything. So yes, Chris.
That is going to limit the number of households who will be getting birds, obviously.
Which is not a bad thing, right?
Which is not a bad thing. And as far as adopting from sanctuaries, that will continue ad infinitum almost. I mean, you won't ever run out of birds that have been relinquished. So I think it's a good idea to focus on birds that are breeders that are raising these birds, and us as writers like Rosemary or presenters at conferences, and veterinarians, of course, educate a person. This is what you need. You need a place in your house that you can put up a 10 by 10 foot cage. And not only that, you have to have an outside aviary. So you list all the things that you need for this animal to have a successful life and to have a successful relationship with this bird. And if they understand it, and if we present it correctly and nicely, or however you want to put it.
Non-judgmentally, just it's a
Thank
fact.
you.
It's a
Thank you.
fact.
It's a fact. I think that can help tremendously.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
can I pick up on a couple of points here? First of all, large parrots. They've been virtually eliminated from pet stores in the UK because of the legislation regarding minimum cage sizes, and pet stores, well, almost none, are prepared to provide the minimum cage sizes. Therefore, it means that breeders find it more difficult to sell the larger parrots, which is a very good thing. I mean, the number of breeders of macaws and cockatoos in the UK has crashed. This also is partly because of the space, which has already been mentioned. Hardly anyone these days, when they buy a house, has the space to put up an aviary. That is why the small birds are popular. But unfortunately, people have this concept that a small bird can be kept in a small cage. In fact, as we know, it's totally wrong. In fact, some of the small species, for example, the green-cheeked conure, they are such skillful flyers. And it's so wrong to keep them in the size cage that most people do keep them in, unless they're let out to fly at least a couple of times a day. And unfortunately, it's very hard to get across to breeders
oh yeah.
the aspect of quality of life, because it's drilled into them that you just breed them in what, and actually in Australia they call them cabinets, which is what they are. They're just box cages. And this concept for breeding, it's the same with budgerigars and canaries, which of course have been domesticated for decades. Well, budgerigar and canary breeders have never altered their concept, but it's just the same story. And, you know, Susan mentioned that there are not many, she doesn't see many mutations kept as companion birds. In fact, the big breeders are exporting most of their mutation birds to India, Taiwan, Indonesia. This is why they breed on a huge scale, because
Which species, Rosemary, are you saying mostly? The grays turning red and the Quakers turning blue? Is that what you're seeing mostly?
yeah,
That kind of thing?
some conures, all the different mutations, Quakers, green-cheeked conures and other paihuras, even lower value birds like lovebirds and cockatiels in the Asia and India and so on. There's a big demand for these mutations because they are, compared with how long they've been available in Europe and the United States, they're relative novelties to them. And the tradition in these countries, unfortunately, is to keep birds in very small cages because the tradition started with songbirds. So,
I know it can be depressing, really.
Yeah.
And
Susan,
you're at,
go ahead,
I-
sorry.
I'm sorry, Anne, you're asking good questions is all I want.
Provoking and hoping for the future. Yeah. Susan, of the clients you have, what proportion are breeders these days as compared to
None.
the past?
Almost none.
And it used to be a whole lot more, right?
Oh, absolutely a lot. Yeah.
Is it because they're not coming or they're just fewer of them? What do you think?
I think it's both. I think both things are there. I think you know, Ohio, you don't think of Ohio as a place where there's going to be a lot of breeding. You think of California and the southern tier states are more likely where you're going to see breeding.
A lot in
Um,
Florida. Yeah.
Yeah, and so interestingly that you bring this up, because I was asked last week by a resident, and she had a case of two young macaws with crop burns,
Oh,
right? And so she didn't know how to deal with it.
Mhm.
yeah.
And
Used to see it all the
because
time, right? It used to be,
well, yeah, but
yeah.
see, and I got to thinking about it, and so I'm walking her through the whole thing, and she said, Detro, we don't know anything about pediatrics and citizens. First of all, they don't know anything about anything because vet schools don't teach them anything, right? So they're learning this all on their own. Like, but I did too. It's just it's a different time. So you're focusing on what you're seeing in your practice, but there's this occasional, oh, here's a crop burn, and then basic questions. Well, what kind of food should we use? What if this were, a different type of bird? If this were a cockatiel, would we use the same food that we would in a macaw? All these really good questions. So sometimes it comes around that you have to learn some of these things. And,
Hard way, unfortunately.
yeah, and what their growth chart should look like. Well, guess who has the only growth chart of the, Susan and when she was married, her husband, the clubs had that, I call it the black book, which has the growth charts in there for looking at how fast they should be growing based on the food that they're getting. So there's all that kind of stuff, that young people, it's just what you see, what you've seen and what you've experienced. But I did forget though, Rosemary, that the green cheeks there are a number of those mutations. I do see those, but that's the only one. Rarely will I see a lovebird mutation.
Mhm.
But
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, can I just say that there is a wealth of published literature on parrot pediatrics or every aspect of parrot keeping and breeding, an absolute wealth of it. But young people don't look for the printed word. If they can't find it online, it doesn't exist. And it's a shame because they don't need to reinvent the wheel. That there was a classic case, a magazine recently published an article about the breeding of a very rare and species of parrot and how the first chicks of this rare species died because they were incorrectly feeding it. All they had to do was to tap in a few words on Google and they would have brought up all the information they needed on how to hand rear this species. And I'm just concerned that so much of the good published magazine in books and in reputable agricultural journals is being lost.
Mhm. That's why we need to reprint as much of your valuable written work as we can, Rosemary.
And digitize it, unfortunately.
Digitize it.
So
Right,
that
right.
that's the
Yeah,
problem, is because they can't,
right. A lot of people
they
don't
live
read
there.
books anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
if this resident didn't think to call me, those poor birds would be in a world of hurt, because you're absolutely right. And the other problem is, well, I'm not young, so I work with these young, I'll call them young people. Poof, they're right into, you ask them a question, poof, they're right into the internet, But the problem is, here is the bird standing in front of them. They can come up with a lot of good information from the internet, but it's in the application. It's in the making a medical decision. That is what I find vet schools are getting poorer and poorer at doing. But
Operationalize.
if we could get them, to take that information and move it forward for that individual patient, like what Rosemary's saying, come here. Then
That's
I
our
think
goal, is to
we're gonna
digitize.
be better off.
Okay,
Yeah.
be great. Yeah. I have a question. Does anybody know why some birds have uropegio glands and other birds don't?
Don't look at me.
It
That's
just
a
seems
great
so
question.
unusual, right? Why
I
do
would ask God. I
Amazon
would ask
giants-
God.
I mean, do they synthesize their calcium
Yes.
D3 a different way because they don't
Yes.
have the gland? Speaking of an Amazon, what is this on your shoulder, Susan?
Yes. He's very worried because mommy's been gone for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
do
You
I
have any
just
idea,
can't.
Rosemary?
Well, it's a very good question because there are closely related species. I mean,
Right.
some macaws have a pituitary gland and others don't.
Oh,
You know,
interesting.
so I don't know the answer. I don't know if anyone yet does know the answer.
Mhm. It just seems like it's a really important gland for those that have it because that's how they synthesize their D3 and put it on spread it across their feathers, right? But
It might relate to the nutrition in the area,
Yes, yeah.
isn't it
So
endemic to like all Amazons?
yeah, but that I know of, all Amazons don't have a uropegio gland.
Right. And they come from all kinds of geographic regions,
Exactly.
like
Yeah, but think about it.
and macaws
There,
eat
like
differently in different
Jose would
places.
tell us, if Jose would tell us, there's different parts of the tree story where they're feeding. So if they were in if they were in an upper tree story, yeah, when he comes over here, then I'll be able to get him down. An upper tree story, that bird can be more exposed to ultraviolet light. So if you have a bunch of birds in a tree story, the Amazons don't need it, but are there other birds based on what they're eating and where they are in the tree story that would determine if they need a uropegio gland or not?
That
That's
sounds
how
like
I
a
would.
scientific study that anybody wants to take.
Jose, we have to get Jose.
The other question in all my trips over, to see wild parrots, I've always been curious and tried to observe how they decide to pick their mates, those that are truly monogamous, which is Amazons and macaws. I don't think conures and others, it's questionable based on what I've seen. What do you think, Rosemary? How do they decide who to marry?
Well, some parrots, young birds, after they're weaned and before they're mature, they do form a creche. And so it's just like if you compare them to young people at a club, it's no different that they'll take a liking to one bird or to one person and not to another. I mean, I don't think it's wrong to anthropomorphize on this because parrots are such individuals. I mean, you can see in the way they react to different people, let alone to different parrots. So they are individuals, and some individuals appeal to them and others don't.
I spent 3 days in the Pantanal watching the hyacinth parents with a juvenile, what seemed to be interviews or speed dating. Another set of parents and a juvenile would fly in, they'd have a chit chat, it'd fly off, another one would fly in. And this happened 3 days straight. And I really felt like the parents were kind of interviewing. But the reason I ask is because, one, I don't see anybody studying that question as to monogamy, not monogamy. How do they decide? But for me, for those of us who work with captive parrots, it seems to be that natural behavior is super important for how birds live in our homes. We find it more challenging to rehome a male Amazon, a male cockatoo, a male macaw, because their natural behaviors kick in as far as, picking one and everybody else must die. And that kind of behavior is really important for people to learn to live with and understand, right? So the nature of parrots in the wild does translate to our homes if we're, conscious of their true nature.
Yeah.
Especially if a parrot in a captive situation has had a partner for a long time, and that partner dies, it can be very, very difficult to repair it,
Hmm.
for it to find another mate.
We've never really seen, I can't say what's in a bird's head or heart, but I don't sense that they look back too much. I have the sense that they're really good at living in the now. And they're all about, am I okay? Is this safe? Is the food good here? Is somebody going to stress me out? Or am I going to be, somebody's dinner? I get the feeling that they move forward so resiliently, which is part of the magic to me of what a nature of a parrot is.
Well,
But
probably a lot depends on the lifespan. Although a small bird like a Forpus parrotlet, they've done a lot of work on individual birds, and they found that what they called the divorce rate was 3%, and that they're very faithful to each other, even a small bird like that. And so it's hard to answer some of these questions.
it is. Yeah, and I guess all we have is our experience, right? And it seems it's been pretty reliable that we find certain species, certain genders have very innate behaviors that affect how we find them a home that is actually going to work for them. So, is your Amazon male or female, Susan?
He's the male,
Yeah,
and
and
I'm
he's fiercely loyal to you, right?
he's fiercely loyal. I raised him. And my dog wants to come back in, but
Does he get along with anybody else in the family
oh yeah, he
proximity?
gets along. Yeah,
Great.
yeah, he does. And so, but what I wanted to say is that, Anne, I thought you were with me when we were in Brazil, and we had decided not to go with a big group, and there were all those Nande conures that were feeding on that corn.
Yep.
And you kept telling me, oh, you don't need a really good camera. Everybody else would take pictures for you, except that day all the people who could take pictures, they left, right? And I thought you were there with me, and
We have quite a few pictures of that, especially
no,
them.
wait a minute. No, here's the point
Yeah.
though. The point was there was this long trough of this rolled corn, and they're all feeding, and I made the comment, I find it interesting how they were organized on the feed trough. They were the directions that they were pointing in. And suddenly there was a swirl of birds. I don't know if you remember this.
And they all flew off, right?
And they all flew off,
In
except
pairs.
we realized at that minute that there was a hawk that caught one of them.
Oh,
Were
no,
you there with me for that?
no, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
That would have,
And so this
good
hawk
impression.
grabbed
Yeah.
this one Nande, and I have this very blurry picture where obviously this flock, who knew immediately of hundreds of birds, that's how intelligent they are, because I wouldn't remember. And so they, because they all look alike, right? But they don't. Okay, so anyway, I have this blurry picture of this bird sitting in the tree, this Nande, and there's a Nande on either side, and they're putting their wing over that bird.
Wow.
That was one of the most powerful things I've ever
Big moment.
seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, there is grief.
Oh,
You know,
definitely. I think there's grief in that
and
regard.
I saw that
I
grief,
agree. I agree.
and so I got to go get my dog. I'll be back.
But I do feel like they're very resilient and adaptable, and they know how to move forward in a way that we humans don't. And, a lot of people who are relinquishing their birds to us go into long stories about the past that really I don't think affects the bird's ability to move forward. It's more about us and our grief sometimes than it is about theirs. But yeah, maybe optimistic, but anyway. um, so what drew you to birds in the first place, Rosemary? What was that first magic moment?
I always loved birds from a very early age, the birds in my garden. But I wasn't really allowed to have pets. And then I went to a pet shop and there was some near my home, and there's some budgerigars there. And I asked, if I could have one. It was a light green male. You just like a wild caught bird, those beautiful little birds that we had in the 1950s. And then, of course, I went back to the shop and got a female and started to breed from them. That's when I was 12 years old. And then I gradually progressed to cockatiels and other commonly available birds. And so it went on all my life.
And now you still live with crimson-bellied conures, is that right?
Yes, I just have one as my companion, one that I unfortunately had to hand rear. Um, and I'm still sorry that I had to do it because I don't think her quality of life is good. She should be with her own species. What happened was I had in the wild crimson-bellied conures and some other parahuras. The young from previous clutches actually help to rear the next lot of young. And so I had a group of about the parents and 4 young, which I left together because I wanted to see how that would work. Unfortunately, it was a disaster because what happened when 2 chicks hatched, there was a big fight, and the female of the breeding pair was nearly killed. And the 2 chicks were neglected, and one didn't survive, and the other one I had to hand rear. And the mother was quite badly injured, so she was kept on her own until she recovered. And when the hand-reared one was weaned, I tried to get her back with her mother, but it wasn't a success. So, she's 8 years old now, and I'm sorry to this day that she's not with her own species, but I just have to make her life as good as I can.
Which brings up the whole question of how do you feel about birds being the only bird in a home? How do you guys view that?
I don't like it.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's
oh, I'm sorry, Rosemary.
sorry. I think it's good to recommend to people when they're considering getting a bird to have 2 so that they can keep each other company. Of course, it's not that easy because you have to decide whether you want 2 males or whether you eventually want to breed from them. And in some female dominant species, like lovebirds or ringnecks, for example, if you kept 2 females together, one would probably eventually kill the other. So it's quite difficult unless you someone can get 2 young birds of totally different species that will be companions but don't actually want to breed. But I do feel that there's something with birds as sociable as parrots. When one is kept on its own, unless it has a tremendously strong bond with its owner, it can't really be fulfilled. And then, of course, if it does have a strong bond with its owner, how long can that last? Because circumstances change and the bigger birds outlive their owners. So it's a very difficult question, but one that is more readily answered with very small species.
Right. How many birds do you live with, Chris?
In the house, just the two budgies. I pretty much have never had cockatoo live in the house. They're all outside.
Why you
and
still
they-
have cabinets behind you and
Yes. Yeah, good
Yeah.
point. Yeah, and so I have 10 that live down in their aviaries, and it's fascinating for me to watch them. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 parent-raised bare-eyed cockatoos, and the other cockatoos have been hand-raised and or bought by me years ago when I was still breeding. And just to see how the parent raised, I'm sorry, the parent raised birds behave as birds. And my guys are free flyers as well. I let them out to fly. And it's like going on a bird watch because it's fascinating to watch them behave the way they are behaving. This time of the year, it's breeding season. So I have to manage them. I have a pair, or I have 2 cockatoos who want to be a pair. And they're both parent raised. And when I let them out to fly, they go searching for nest cavities. And that's all well and good in the very, very beginning of breeding season because they return pretty rapidly. At this time of the year, they have to be let out separately because they would spend their whole day. Anyway, so that's fascinating to watch. And my parent raised birds look at me as, oh, there's that thing that gives us food. And that's all. And they will readily accept it. They will like to be trained. They're trained birds as well. And then they are on their way to be birds and interact with their mates and other companions. And yet my hand-raised birds, it's like, you know, one here, one there, and I'm constantly telling them to get off. And there's, if they're out flying, the male, who is very bonded to me, will chase off a female who is very bonded to me. And so it's this constant turmoil. And that's what we see in our houses, right? With parent raised. I'm not saying every single bird. I'm just saying generally that's
They're
what
more
we-
needy for sure. Yeah.
more needy.
And for the record, I think we should stipulate that you are a trained professional,
Right.
basically flyer of birds. So, you know
I don't-
what you're doing. Don't go let your bird outside just because you heard
Thank
that.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't promote that at all. I'm just saying that when they are out.
I wish we
flying.
could, right? But it takes training and knowledge to do that safely. It's not for everybody, right?
Anyway, so I live with the 2 different aspects of raising birds, and it's fascinating to see the difference.
And Susan, how many birds do you live with?
Romeo,
Just Romeo. Okay.
it's Romeo now. And I had an older female, and that was an interesting dynamic. So I think the questions that everyone has posed is it depends on your situation, your home situation, the actual species, as well as the actual birds themselves. So I have an outdoor aviary. So I would normally have them outside every day, but now we have avian influenza virus here. So, and we're on the Mississippi Flyway. So this is posing a major problem of getting them out, getting them in sunshine. So but I would, now that I only have Romeo, because my old girl passed away. Well, I put her to sleep because she had a tumor, a massive tumor in her cloaca.
How old is Romeo?
Romeo, he would be, Romeo, how old are you now? 35. So I though would be very reticent about putting him out in that outdoor aviary by himself.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
So I would only want to put him in that outdoor aviary if there were other Amazons in there. So there, several, like 2, 3, for example. So, he would have before they would go out during the day and then I'd bring him in at night type thing.
Right. Dr.
So,
Dahlhausen told us last weekend when we asked him about avian flu, he said, unless you had a lot of migrating geese around you, that he thought air and sunshine was more important than the likelihood that our parrots would catch avian flu, because I know, everybody's concerned about that right now.
right.
Is
Yeah,
that
but I live,
is
I
it
live
your
on the
take?
Mississippi Flyway. B, I have a pond. Okay, here comes Romeo again.
Right, right. Okay, I
And,
promise. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and so we have a lot of mosquitoes. So there's again all those criteria,
Mosquitoes are related to avian flu? You think they're?
Well, the potential vector, they can be a potential vector.
I see.
And we have a lot of, this is the time of the flyway, the movement of the ducks and the geese. And I've got a group of Canada geese sitting in my pond right now.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
you
so
definitely have to do
that's,
more. Right.
yeah.
I promised Rosemary we would keep this to basically an hour because we are aging, wiser, older women. Yes. So I just have one last question out of curiosity. What is the oldest parrot you guys have known of, evidence-based, not just hearsay?
My,
No, long-lived birds, we all know they can, but do they?
my Triton cockatoo, sulfur-crested cockatoo, she's probably 45 to 48 years old right now. And she's gorgeous. One thing about birds, parrots, is they don't show their age when they age. Because she's as beautiful as the day I got her. And I'm very.
And you've had her all her life?
I've had her since 10. She was 10.
So
So
you've
I'm
spent a lot of years together. Yeah,
very jealous and envious that she looks gorgeous.
I'm with you. How about you, Susan? I think you've told me you've known of birds that were like in their
Well,
90s.
so Romeo, the bird that I had, so there's some slight hearsay in this. But I had her a long time, and every indicator was that she was closer to 100. And she still, by God, I gotta lay eggs every summer to show Romeo that I might be an old girl, but I'm still
Desirable. Yes.
sexy, right? But she looked old. Unlike what Chris is saying, she started looking old.
Well,
Feet change, the feather change.
Yeah, the more in the feet and the around the face, and I see this a lot in older birds. A lot of times the feathers will start changing, and particularly the feet will start looking older and
Using
very
their
arthritic.
scales. Yeah.
Arthritic, and they can't grip, and those are the types of things that we'll see is a lot of arthritis, and the feet are particularly susceptible. That's
And
why
you see the feather color change, like for thyroid
yes, I
or
have seen that.
pigmentation?
Yeah, I have seen that too. But that's why I keep talking about Chris. I keep saying people need to look online at Phoenix Landing and Chris and stuff, because flapping is so important to keep this heart functioning, because they were supreme athletes, and the more flat, and I say, walking around doesn't count.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you, Susan. I mean, flying is just the best medicine you could give your bird. And I don't mean
Absolutely.
flying from A to B a couple of times a day. I mean, you got to work that bird. I had a Philippine cockatoo who could not fly. He had a wing injury. He had heart failure. Last year we had to put him down, and he was only 30 years old, and other birds are way above that, and they're the flyers, and he couldn't fly. So there was a difference there, and yet both ate the same. food and everything. So boy, I agree. And even my little budgies, they're extending their lifespan by flying all over the house.
I mean, that's what I tell my clients all the time, is if you want this bird to live long and healthy,
Yeah.
the more because they're in flapping, and
Yeah.
not just let's walk down the hallway and flap once, like just like you're saying, it's got to be throughout the day.
Yeah.
I think Ann has heard me say this before. I did have one engineering guy actually kind of take me up on this, but if we could design a little coffee
Wind tunnel.
table wind tunnel,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
put the bird in it, you hit the button, and the bird's like flapping like crazy. You
A
go up,
little
you take your
coercive,
shower,
maybe, though,
right?
Susan.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you hit the button, it's done, or like you're cooking dinner, the bird's flying away, and then you have a. I think they would live to 100.
Yeah.
The old birds live to 100, but what we're seeing in veterinary medicine is if you have a larger size bird, a parrot size up, when they hit 20, you're going to start seeing a lot of changes, unless they've been outside and flying around a lot. Now, your birds will be different, because that's why your bird didn't look like she aged, because she didn't, because she was flying.
Yeah. And she's
But
outside in the sun.
and she's outside, right. But if they don't, then they start going to heck on you, and that's where veterinary medicine comes in. And I try to get people to understand that. I want to kind of leave with this, Ann, because I know we got to leave, but there are things you can do for your bird. And when people say, well, he's really old, so I don't think I want to do anything. I want to beat them. Just,
Yeah.
it's like,
They
okay,
need
so
to
it's
be
like,
more
I'm
than
old,
ever.
so you're
Yeah.
just going to throw me out a wheelchair and let me sit there and be suffering? Like, are you kidding me?
Right.
That's me and my soapbox. There
No,
are things we can do.
Mhm.
Rosemary, what's the oldest bird you know of? Wasn't there one, a green wing in the London somewhere that was 90 something? 92?
No,
That
so
was
much exaggeration about longevity. For example, there was a lot of publicity about a macaw that was supposed to have belonged to Winston Churchill and supposed to be 100 years old. But when you look back in the records, you find it wasn't even the same species as the one that Churchill had. I think very, very few parrots live beyond the 70s, and they would be cockatoos, and macaws quite often live into their 60s, and Amazons into their 50s. But there's so much exaggeration. I mean, I don't take a lot of these records. I only know about the birds that I have kept, and the two that I have kept longest, and I had both of them as adults, were my yellow-fronted Amazon, who I had for 39 years, and a yellow-streaked lorry, who I also had for 39 years, and both of them were wild caught, so there's no way of knowing their age. But also, we quite often find that the long birds with genuine longevity records were actually wild caught and not captive bred. So I'm sure those early years of flight contributed to their longevity. And I can only endorse what you've all said about the importance of our birds getting enough flight exercise. It cannot be overemphasized.
and all the health benefits from being parent raised also probably gave
Oh
them.
my gosh. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Both mentally and physically. My guys learn from their parents. They learn to forage. In the aviary. They're not outside yet flying around free. But when they wean, the parents are there, and I put up all sorts of foraging goodies and such, and the babies are watching, and they go try it, and they just mirror their parents, and their parents take such good care of them. They're always around them, protecting them. It's a wonder to see. And so we end up with a very confident, knowledgeable weanling, ready to tackle life. It's really beautiful to see.
Agreed. Well, I think we all hope that the next generations will ask these questions, consider all the things that make life better for parrots, and try to make those changes. I know there's a lot of action-oriented groups out there, the Alliance for Parrots, the One Earth Conservation. There are a lot of groups that are really trying to make it, no cages, etc. I don't know how effective they'll be in all parts of the world, but I think that the four of us can agree that change for the better is essential for the quality of life of parrots in captivity.
A question, what are those groups you're talking about? Could you name some? Because I don't even know of them.
Parrot Alliance is one I know. Dr. Laura Kim Joyner with One Earth Conservation. She does a lot of group-oriented things that are not only conservation related, but are also trying to improve things in captivity. IAPP, yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
That'll get started anyway. Thank you.
Yeah. There are some meetings, like I was part of one the other day, where there was talk about how to affect change in pet stores. Some states are really good at legislation for things like that, and other states you would never see anything. And God knows what's going to happen now with the Animal Welfare Act changes we've seen finally happen here in the United States, if that'll stay intact or not. But so that group is very focused on trying to make sure that the birds are if they're sold or if they're bred, that there is some protection for doing better by them. So, which is a good thing. Yeah.
Good to know. Yeah, a little activism out there with
Yes.
local state governments and such.
Exactly. And so there is a focus, like in that particular group, especially focusing at the local level. And there's talk about what's happening in different states, because some states like Massachusetts, I think, is considering a major bill right now. Just getting people aware even. And of course, there's people on the other side of that equation who are anti any kind of regulation, any kind of law, and they are very proactive and successful often too. Even when they know a situation is bad, they don't want anybody telling anybody what to do, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah. And those of us at the other end that are seeing the birds come into the clinic or into the rehoming process, et cetera, are like, yeah, but we really could be doing better, even if it takes a law. So, yeah.
Well,
thank you, Anne.
Anne, I would like to thank you so much for initiating this discussion, and for all you've done during your time with Phoenix Landing. It really is phenomenal for one person to achieve what you have.
No, not one person. Definitely a team.
Yeah,
my name very often, right?
Without you, it would never have happened.
Yeah, if there's anybody to give gratitude to, that would be Phoenix. That one bird changed my life and just turned 30. So I probably won't see the next 30 plus years through, but hey, we made it this far and hopefully affected a lot of positive change for birds everywhere. But truly a team effort, and that counts all you, the three of you, you three wise friends. Yes.
Thank you, Anne. Well, we couldn't have helped give some knowledge to a better outfit such as Phoenix Landing. Now, you guys just educate the heck out of everybody. I just love it.
And never enough education, right? I love the people who come back all the time to just pick up a little something. So that's all I ask people to do that come through the organization is be askers, be learners, be avid, be curious avidly. Don't know all the answers, because we're counting on lots of people to make things better in the future. Yeah. So
I hope you're going to have your, dare I say it, your wellness next year.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Anne, you should talk about that.
May 3rd, our next one is now set for May 31st, 2026. Susan and I haven't even started to talk about the theme
Well,
or,
Susan got a little indisposed when she fell down.
yes,
So,
she's been a bit klutzy recently. Yes.
It wasn't horse related, was it?
no, unfortunately, it's nothing to say this massive, wonderful thing that happened. And then like the first time I fell over the dogs, this time I was just trying to walk to the car. So the
Oh.
surgeon thought that my right knee basically collapsed on me, it dislocated. And when I fell, because I had a hip implant from the first time, and apparently because it was loose and it basically fell out when he opened me up,
No,
that it
Oh.
banged around so much that it splintered my bone into 5 big shards.
Jeez,
Sounds
please.
horrifying.
So I've been in the hospital for the last 2.5 weeks. I've missed March.
Well, you're pretty coherent given that you've been through that trauma. So
Yeah, great. You're up now.
I'm not sure I
Yeah,
would fare as
kind of.
well. Yeah.
As tough as I can be, that I got a lot of swelling in my leg. That's why I had to get up and move around here a little bit. But boy, ladies, you're all wonderful. You all
Agreed.
really are, and you're kind of the groundbreakers in this area. And it's just been a delight. I just wanted so much to get on, and I'm sorry that we had problems getting me on. And fortunately, my son-in-law was here to get us on. And
Yeah.
gosh, it was just so much fun. And I think there's going to be a future, and we have to keep talking, and we have to keep inspiring to keep the future bright.
We do.
Exactly.
We
Well, it's
do.
been an honor to share this time with you all. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
And-
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
to our participants and all the interesting chats they've been sending us. So
Yes, we haven't had a chance to even answer anybody's questions. And we had quite a few questions sent to us in advance, but they were all mostly very specific to that person and that bird. And that wasn't kind of the
Yeah.
theme today.
Yeah,
So,
we're trying to make it a more global assessment. Right.
exactly.
all
And I
right.
think we have agreed on a lot of fundamentals about parent raised and flight and more space and a lot of things we hope to see for the future. So
Excellent.
carry
Thank
on.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being
Thank
here.
you.
Don't
Thank you
forget,
so much.
April 12th, join us again for a talk about how to prep your bird for the veterinary visit with the wonderful Cassie Molina. So,
Oh, Cassie. Okay, great. Okay,
Yeah.
bye.
okay, bye.
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.